Marcus Chen stood at the entrance of Jefferson High School, his combat boots silent on the polished floor. At 17, he carried himself with the rigid posture of someone who had learned that slouching could mean death. Other students pushed past him, laughing and shouting about weekend plans, their voices creating a chaos that made his enhanced hearing spike with phantom artillery sounds. He had survived 3 years of interstellar warfare against the Zephyrian Empire. He had led squads of hardened Marines through the crystalline caves of Kepler 442b while dodging plasma fire that could melt steel. He had earned 17 medals of valor and saved entire colonies from alien invasion. But walking into American literature class made his palms sweat more than any battle ever had. The Terran Defense Corps had a policy about child soldiers. Officially, they didn't exist. Unofficially, when the aliens attacked the outer colonies and every adult was either dead or fighting, exceptions were made. Marcus had been 14 when the Zephyrians hit New Shanghai Station, where his parents worked as terraforming engineers. He had been the only survivor in a shelter built for 300 people. The rescue ship that found him 3 weeks later was a military transport heading straight into the war zone. The captain, a grizzled woman named Rodriguez, had given him 2 choices: stay on the ship as a civilian refugee and likely die when they inevitably got shot down, or pick up a rifle and learn to fight. Marcus chose the rifle. 3 years later, when humanity finally pushed the Zephyrians back beyond the neutral zone, Marcus found himself with another impossible choice: return to Earth and pretend to be a normal teenager, or remain in the military and abandon any chance at the childhood he'd lost. The Corps psychologists insisted that reintegration was essential for his mental health. They were probably right, though Marcus suspected they had no idea what they were talking about. Now, standing in front of his locker, Marcus tried to remember the combination. The simple task felt more complex than disarming a Zephyrian plasma mine. Around him, students complained about homework and gossiped about who was dating whom. Their biggest concerns seemed to revolve around the upcoming homecoming dance and whether the cafeteria would serve pizza or that weird synthetic protein again. "Excuse me, are you the new kid?" a voice asked behind him. Marcus turned to see a girl with bright blue hair and paint-stained fingers. She wore clothes that looked like they had survived several artistic explosions, and her smile was the kind of genuine expression he hadn't seen since leaving the colonies. "I'm Sarah," she continued when he didn't immediately respond. "You look completely lost, which means you're either new or having an existential crisis. Given that it's only Tuesday morning, I'm guessing new." "Marcus," he said, his voice still carrying the clipped efficiency he'd learned in military briefings. "And yes, first day." "Cool. Where'd you transfer from? You've got this whole mysterious warrior vibe going on. Very dramatic." Marcus almost smiled. If she only knew. "I was homeschooled for a while." That was technically true. The Corps' field training programs could certainly be considered alternative education. He had learned calculus while calculating orbital bombardment trajectories and studied chemistry through analyzing alien atmospheric compositions. His literature education came primarily from reading letters from home during the few quiet moments between battles. "Well, homeschool warrior, you're about to enter the intellectual battleground that is Mr. Peterson's American Lit class. Fair warning, he thinks every book ever written is a metaphor for the human condition, and he will ask you to share your feelings about it." Marcus followed Sarah down the hallway, noting exit routes and potential defensive positions out of habit. The school's architecture was all wrong for security, with too many windows and not enough cover. Anyone with basic tactical training could. He forced himself to stop thinking like a soldier. The classroom buzzed with the kind of energy that made Marcus's combat reflexes twitch. Students sprawled across desks in casual poses that would have earned them a week of kitchen duty in the Corps. Their weapons of choice were smartphones and coffee cups instead of plasma rifles and field rations. Mr. Peterson turned out to be a thin man with an enthusiasm for literature that bordered on manic. He bounced around the classroom like he was conducting an orchestra, gesturing wildly as he discussed the assigned reading. "So, who can tell me about the symbolism in Chapter 12 of the things they carried?" Peterson asked, his eyes scanning the room like a targeting system. Several hands shot up. Marcus had actually read the book during his deployment, finding strange comfort in O'Brien's war stories during the long waits between missions, but raising his hand felt like painting a target on himself. "Marcus!" Peterson called out, apparently deciding that the new student needed immediate integration. "You've been very quiet. What did you think of O'Brien's portrayal of the psychological weight of warfare?" The classroom fell silent. Marcus felt 20 pairs of eyes studying him, waiting for him to stumble through some awkward teenage response about feelings and metaphors. He could handle enemy fire, but this kind of attention made him want to find the nearest exit. "I think O'Brien understood that the real weight isn't the equipment you carry," Marcus said slowly. "It's the decisions you make and the people you fail to save. The physical weight is just easier to measure." The silence stretched longer. Peterson's eyebrows rose toward his hairline. Even Sarah looked surprised by the depth of his response. "That's remarkably insightful," Peterson said finally. "Have you had personal experience with military literature?" Marcus shrugged. "My grandfather was a veteran, Vietnam." Another technically true statement. His grandfather had indeed served, though Marcus's understanding of war came from more recent and significantly more alien sources. The conversation moved on, but Marcus noticed several students glancing at him with new curiosity. He spent the rest of the class trying to blend into his seat while Peterson continued his enthusiastic analysis of trauma narratives. When the bell rang, Sarah appeared at his desk immediately. "Okay. That was either really profound or you've got some serious family history. Either way, you're officially interesting." "I prefer boring," Marcus said, gathering his books with military precision. "Too late. You've been classified as mysterious and thoughtful. It's social death around here." She grinned. "Lucky for you, I specialize in befriending social outcasts and artistic disasters. What's your next class?" Marcus checked his schedule. "AP Physics with Dr. Martinez." "Oh, you're one of those smart kids. Even better. I'll walk you there and provide commentary on our fellow prisoners of the educational system." As they moved through the hallway, Sarah kept up a constant stream of observations about their classmates. She pointed out the various social groups with the precision of a military intelligence briefing, the athletes clustered around the trophy case, the theater kids rehearsing lines by their lockers, the academic elite studying even during passing period. "See that group by the vending machines?" Sarah nodded toward a cluster of students in expensive clothes. "Those are the untouchables, rich kids whose parents basically own the school board. They exist in a parallel universe where the biggest crisis is running out of premium coffee pods." Marcus watched the group with professional interest. They moved with the casual arrogance of people who had never faced real danger, never had to make decisions where failure meant death. Part of him envied their innocence. Another part found their complaints about minor inconveniences almost insulting. "And over there," Sarah continued, "we have the rebels without causes. They think wearing black clothes and listening to angry music makes them deep and misunderstood. Most of them will end up in business school." "What about you?" Marcus asked. "Which group claims you?" "I'm proudly ungrouped, an artistic free agent. I paint, therefore I am weird." She gestured to her paint-stained clothes as evidence. "What about you? Where does the mysterious homeschool warrior fit in?" Marcus considered the question seriously. In the military, social hierarchies were clear and functional. Everyone knew their role, their responsibilities, and their place in the chain of command. High school seemed to operate on entirely different principles. ones he didn't understand. "I don't think I fit anywhere yet," he admitted. "That's perfect. Fitting in is overrated anyway. Besides, you've got that whole strong, silent type thing working for you. Very classic." They reached the physics classroom where Dr. Martinez was already setting up some kind of experiment involving lasers and mirrors. Marcus felt a familiar surge of relief. Science made sense. Laws of physics didn't change based on social dynamics or teenage drama. "Thanks for the escort," he told Sarah, "and the intelligence briefing." "Intelligence briefing?" She laughed. "I like that. Very official. See you at lunch, soldier boy." Marcus paused at the classroom door, watching Sarah disappear into the crowd. She had called him soldier boy like it was a joke, but something in her expression suggested she might be more perceptive than she let on. The thought made him nervous. Dr. Martinez turned out to be exactly the kind of teacher Marcus could respect: precise, logical, and more interested in results than feelings. She launched immediately into a discussion of quantum mechanics that reminded him of the briefings he'd received before missions involving alien technology. "Can anyone explain why quantum entanglement was considered impossible until Einstein's theories were proven incomplete?" Dr. Martinez asked. Marcus found himself raising his hand before he could stop himself. Quantum mechanics had been essential knowledge when dealing with Zephyrian faster-than-light communication systems. Because classical physics assumed that objects could only influence each other through direct interaction, he said. Einstein called quantum entanglement spooky action at a distance because it violated the speed of light limitation, but he was working with incomplete information about the nature of space-time itself. Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. "Excellent. And can you give us a practical application where this principle is used today?" Marcus hesitated. The most obvious application he could think of was the quantum communication arrays that allowed real-time coordination across interstellar distances. But that technology was classified military information, decades ahead of anything available to civilian science. "Quantum computing," he said instead, "and theoretical applications in instantaneous communication systems." "Theoretical, yes," Dr. Martinez agreed. "Though some of the research coming out of the Terran Defense Corps suggests practical applications might be closer than we think." Marcus tried not to react to the mention of his former employer. Dr. Martinez was studying him with the same curious expression Peterson had worn earlier. He was revealing too much, standing out when he needed to blend in. The rest of the class passed in a blur of equations and theoretical discussions. Marcus found himself automatically calculating orbital mechanics and energy requirements, mental habits left over from planning space battles. When other students struggled with basic physics problems, he had to consciously slow down his responses to avoid drawing more attention. After class, he walked toward the cafeteria, dreading the social navigation required for lunch period. The hallways were crowded with students moving in complex patterns that seemed to follow unwritten rules he didn't understand. Groups formed and reformed like tactical units, but based on social status rather than military necessity. The cafeteria itself was a chaos that triggered every combat instinct Marcus possessed. Hundreds of teenagers crowded into a space with insufficient exits, creating noise levels that made communication difficult and sight lines that were constantly blocked. In a real emergency, the evacuation would be a disaster. He grabbed a tray and moved through the serving line, selecting food based more on nutritional requirements than taste. The lunch options were better than military rations, but worse than the fresh food he remembered from the colonies before the war. Everything was processed, packaged, designed for efficiency rather than pleasure. "Marcus!" Sarah's voice cut through the cafeteria noise. She waved at him from a table near the windows, where she sat with a small group of students who looked like they shared her artistic inclinations. He made his way over, carrying his tray with the same careful balance he'd used during shipboard meals in zero gravity. The table was covered with sketchbooks, paint samples and what appeared to be architectural plans for some kind of sculpture. "Everyone, this is Marcus, the mysterious warrior poet I told you about," Sarah announced as he sat down. "Marcus, meet the art department refugees." The introductions blurred together. Jake, who composed electronic music. Emma, who wrote poetry about environmental disasters. David, who created sculptures from recycled electronics. And Maria, who painted portraits that somehow captured people's fears instead of their faces. They were discussing their upcoming senior art projects with the intensity Marcus had once reserved for mission planning. Their passion for creative expression was genuine and infectious, even if he couldn't entirely understand their medium. "What about you?" Emma asked him. "Are you artistic or are you one of those science types?" "I don't really create anything," Marcus said honestly. "I'm better at problem solving." "Problem solving can be creative," David said. "What kind of problems?" Marcus found himself in dangerous territory again. His primary expertise involved solving problems like how to destroy alien war machines and how to keep people alive in hostile environments. Neither seemed appropriate for lunch conversation. "Mostly technical stuff," he said vaguely. "Engineering challenges." "That's cool," Jake said. "I bet you could help us figure out the sound system for our installation. We're trying to create this immersive experience that represents the chaos of modern communication, but the acoustic engineering is kicking our asses." Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted across the cafeteria. Voices rose in anger, and he saw students backing away from what looked like a developing confrontation. His combat training kicked in automatically, assessing threats and escape routes. Two groups of students faced each other near the center of the room. Marcus recognized some of them from Sarah's earlier briefing, the wealthy untouchables versus what looked like a mixed group of athletes and rebels. The argument seemed to center around a spilled drink and escalating accusations of disrespect. "Great," Sarah muttered. "Brad Henderson versus anyone who looks at him wrong. This happens every few weeks." Marcus watched the confrontation develop with professional interest. Brad Henderson appeared to be the primary aggressor, a tall student with the kind of confidence that came from never facing real consequences. His opponent was smaller but moved with controlled aggression that suggested actual fighting experience. The argument escalated quickly, moving from verbal sparring to shoving. Other students formed a circle, some filming with their phones, others calling for teachers. Marcus found himself standing before he realized he'd made the decision to move. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Sarah called after him. He didn't answer because he wasn't entirely sure himself. The tactical situation was clear. A larger aggressor was using size and social status to intimidate someone smaller. In the military, stopping the fight would have been a simple matter of rank and authority. Here, he had neither, but he did have other advantages. Marcus walked calmly into the circle, positioning himself between the two combatants with the kind of movement that suggested absolute confidence in his ability to handle whatever happened next. The crowd fell silent, sensing something different about his presence. "Problem here?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded soldiers in life-or-death situations. Brad Henderson turned toward him with the sneer of someone used to intimidating teenagers. "This doesn't concern you, new kid. Walk away." Marcus studied Henderson with the same calm assessment he'd once used to evaluate enemy positions. The older student was taller and heavier, but moved with the careless aggression of someone who had never faced a real opponent. His stance was all wrong for actual combat, designed more for intimidation than effectiveness. "I'm making it my concern," Marcus said evenly. "You're done here." Henderson laughed, but the sound was forced. Something in Marcus's tone had registered as genuinely dangerous. "You think you're tough because you're new? I've been running this school for 4 years. I'll destroy you." "No," Marcus said with quiet certainty. You won't. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of Henderson's recognition that this wasn't going according to script. Marcus didn't move, didn't threaten, didn't even raise his voice. He simply stood there with the absolute confidence of someone who had survived real violence and knew exactly what he was capable of. Henderson's friends shifted nervously behind him. Even the crowd seemed to sense that something fundamental had changed in the dynamic. This wasn't going to be the usual high school confrontation. "Walk away, Henderson," Marcus said finally. "Take your friends and go somewhere else." For a moment, it looked like Henderson might actually try to fight. Marcus prepared himself for that possibility, calculating the most efficient way to end the confrontation without causing permanent damage. But Henderson's survival instincts, buried under years of easy dominance, finally kicked in. "This isn't over," Henderson said, but he was already backing away. "Yes, it is," Marcus replied with finality. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed by the lack of actual violence. Marcus turned to check on Henderson's intended victim, a sophomore who looked shaken but uninjured. "You okay?" Marcus asked. The younger student nodded gratefully. "Thanks, man. I don't know what would have happened if—" "Nothing would have happened," Marcus said. "Guys like that only fight when they know they can win." As he walked back to Sarah's table, Marcus realized that every student in the cafeteria was now staring at him. He had just painted an enormous target on himself, marking him as someone willing to challenge the established social order. In military terms, he had just declared war on the local power structure. Sarah looked at him with new recognition in her eyes. "Okay," she said slowly. "That was definitely not normal homeschool behavior." Marcus sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted. His first day wasn't even half over, and he had already violated his primary objective of blending in. The art students around the table watched him with expressions ranging from admiration to concern. "Where did you learn to do that?" Emma asked quietly. Marcus considered several possible answers before settling on honesty. "Sometimes you learn things the hard way." Jake leaned forward. "Are you, like, in witness protection or something?" "No," Marcus said, "just trying to start over." The conversation resumed around him, but with a new undercurrent of curiosity and respect. Marcus found himself both grateful for their acceptance and worried about the attention it might bring. In the military, standing out usually meant becoming a target. He suspected high school operated on similar principles. The rest of lunch passed quickly, with Sarah and her friends treating him like a cross between a bodyguard and a mysterious celebrity. They didn't press him for more information, but he could see the questions in their eyes. He was clearly not what he appeared to be, and teenagers were naturally curious about mysteries. As they prepared to leave for afternoon classes, Sarah pulled him aside. "Listen, what you did back there was either really brave or really stupid. Probably both. Brad Henderson isn't going to forget this, and he's got friends in high places." "I can handle Henderson," Marcus said with confidence born of experience with much worse enemies. "I believe you," Sarah said seriously. "That's what worries me. You handled that situation like someone who's done it before. Like, a lot. And I don't think you learned that in homeschool." Marcus met her eyes, recognizing intelligence and perception that went deeper than her artistic exterior suggested. "Some things you can't explain." "I get that," she said. "But whatever your story is, you're stuck with us now. The art weirdos have officially adopted you, mysterious past and all." As they walked toward their afternoon classes, Marcus reflected on the unexpected turn his reintegration had taken. He had planned to remain invisible, to complete his education quietly and figure out what came next. Instead, he had made allies, enemies, and revealed enough of his true nature to ensure that invisibility was no longer an option. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch and the beginning of what promised to be a very interesting afternoon. Marcus squared his shoulders and prepared to face whatever came next. After all, he had survived interstellar warfare. How difficult could the rest of high school possibly be? He was about to find out that some battles couldn't be won with tactics and determination alone. Some required understanding an entirely different kind of warfare, one fought with social dynamics and teenage politics rather than plasma rifles and orbital bombardments. And in this new battlefield, Marcus was about to discover that being a war hero might actually be a disadvantage. The chemistry lab smelled wrong to Marcus. Too clean, too safe, missing the acrid bite of recycled air and the metallic tang that came from living in enclosed spaces for months at a time. Dr. Williams was explaining basic molecular structures while Marcus unconsciously calculated the blast radius if someone accidentally mixed the wrong compounds. Marcus, since you seem fascinated by the periodic table, perhaps you could explain why noble gases are considered chemically inert? Dr. Williams asked, clearly testing the new student who had been staring at the chemical storage cabinet with unusual intensity. Marcus dragged his attention back to the lesson. They have complete electron shells, so they don't need to form bonds with other elements to achieve stability. Though they can form compounds under extreme conditions, high pressure or electrical discharge. Excellent. And what practical applications does this principle have? Marcus almost mentioned the Zephyrian atmospheric processors that used xenon compounds to terraform hostile environments, but caught himself. Helium for cooling systems, argon for welding, neon for lighting. Also useful for creating inert atmospheres where you need to prevent chemical reactions. Dr. Williams nodded approvingly, but Marcus noticed several classmates exchanging glances. Once again, he had revealed more knowledge than a typical high school student should possess. He was developing a reputation as the mysteriously well-educated transfer student, which was the last thing he needed. After chemistry, Marcus had a free period that he decided to spend in the library. The space was quieter than the rest of the school, filled with students actually studying rather than socializing. He found a corner table and pulled out his tablet, intending to catch up on the homework assignments he'd been given. Instead, he found himself researching Jefferson High School's social dynamics and recent history. If he was going to survive this environment, he needed intelligence on the local power structures. The student newspaper archives revealed a pattern of conflicts between different social groups, with Brad Henderson's name appearing frequently in disciplinary reports that had been mysteriously expunged or downgraded. Interesting reading? Marcus looked up to find a girl with short dark hair and glasses perched on the edge of his table. She wore the kind of practical clothes that suggested function over fashion, and carried herself with the confident efficiency of someone comfortable with information and systems. Public records, Marcus said carefully, getting familiar with the local environment. I'm Jessica Park, she said, settling into the chair across from him without invitation. Student Council President, National Honor Society, and unofficial keeper of the school's institutional memory. And you're Marcus Chen, the mysterious transfer student who just declared war on our local aristocracy. Marcus closed his tablet. Word travels fast. Faster than light, apparently, Jessica said with a slight smile. Your performance in the cafeteria has been analyzed, dissected, and turned into at least 6 different versions depending on who's telling the story. The most dramatic version has you as some kind of trained assassin. That's ridiculous, Marcus said, though not as convincingly as he'd hoped. Is it? Jessica leaned forward, studying him with the kind of analytical attention he'd seen in intelligence officers. Because I've been watching you all day and you don't move like a normal teenager. You scan rooms like you're looking for threats. You position yourself near exits. And you handled Brad Henderson like someone who's dealt with actually dangerous people before. Marcus remained silent, recognizing an interrogation technique when he encountered one. Jessica was clearly more than just a student politician. I've done some research on transfer students with unusual backgrounds, Jessica continued, Military families move around a lot. Sometimes their kids end up with unconventional educations and skill sets. Sometimes those kids have trouble adjusting to civilian environments. The observation was too accurate for comfort. Marcus found himself wondering exactly how much research Jessica had done and what resources she had access to. "What's your point?" he asked. "My point is that this school has a delicate ecosystem. Brad Henderson and his friends represent old money and political connections. They're not just bullies. They're the children of people who fund school programs and influence administrative decisions. When someone challenges them directly, it creates ripple effects." "Are you warning me off?" "I'm offering you information," Jessica said. "Henderson's father sits on the school board. His mother runs the largest charity foundation in the county. His uncle is the mayor. What happened in the cafeteria wasn't just a teenage confrontation. It was a challenge to a power structure that extends far beyond this school." Marcus absorbed this information with professional interest. He had assumed Henderson was just a typical high school bully, but the situation was apparently more complex. Political dynasties and inherited power were concepts he understood from dealing with colonial governments and military hierarchies. "What would you recommend?" he asked. "Normally? Apologize, keep your head down, and hope they don't decide to make an example out of you." Jessica paused, studying his expression. "But something tells me that's not going to happen." "No," Marcus agreed. "It's not? Then you're going to need allies. Real ones. Not just the art department kids who think you're romantically mysterious. You're going to need people who understand how things actually work around here." Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "New kid thinks he's tough. Find out tonight. Parking lot, 8 p.m. Come alone." Jessica glanced at the message when Marcus's expression darkened. "Let me guess. Henderson wants a private conversation?" "Something like that." "Marcus, whatever you're thinking, don't. Henderson doesn't fight fair, and he doesn't fight alone. This isn't about proving who's tougher. It's about demonstrating that challenging the social order has consequences." Marcus stood up, gathering his books. The message was clearly intended to intimidate him into backing down, but it had the opposite effect. He had spent 3 years dealing with aliens who considered humans nothing more than pests to be exterminated. A spoiled teenager with delusions of grandeur didn't rate high on his threat assessment scale. "Thanks for the warning," he told Jessica, "and the intelligence briefing. You're not going to listen to anything I just said, are you?" "I listened. I just don't agree with your conclusions." Jessica shook her head. "You know what the difference is between courage and stupidity?" "What?" "Courage is calculated risk-taking based on accurate threat assessment. Stupidity is charging into danger because you're too proud to back down." Marcus paused at the library door. "What if the real danger comes from backing down? What if showing weakness here makes everything worse?" "Then you'd better be absolutely certain you can win," Jessica said. "Because if you lose, it won't just be your problem. It'll be everyone who stood with you." The warning followed Marcus through his remaining classes. By the time school ended, word of the parking lot confrontation had spread through the student body with the efficiency of a military communication network. Students who had never spoken to him before offered advice, encouragement, or warnings depending on their social allegiance. Sarah found him at his locker, her usual artistic chaos replaced by genuine concern. "Please tell me you're not actually planning to meet Henderson tonight." "I'm planning to end this before it gets worse," Marcus said, transferring books between his locker and backpack with mechanical precision. "This isn't some action movie where the hero beats up the bad guys and everyone learns a valuable lesson," Sarah said. "This is real life, where the bad guys have lawyers and political connections." "I know exactly what this is," Marcus replied, "and I know exactly how to handle it." The art department refugees had gathered around his locker like a small tactical unit preparing for deployment. Even Jake and David, who usually avoided conflict, looked ready to offer support. "We could come with you," Emma suggested. "Witnesses might prevent anything too crazy." "No," Marcus said firmly. "This stays between Henderson and me." "Why?" Maria asked. "Why not just report him to the administration?" "They have to do something about threats." Marcus almost laughed at the suggestion. The idea of running to authority figures when faced with intimidation was so foreign to his experience that he couldn't even process it seriously. In the military, you handled your problems directly, or you didn't survive long enough for them to matter. "Because reporting him won't stop him," Marcus said. "It'll just teach him to be more careful about getting caught." The group exchanged worried glances. Marcus realized that his response had revealed yet another piece of his unconventional background. Normal teenagers were supposed to trust in adult authority and institutional protection. He had learned early that sometimes you were the only authority you could count on. "Look," he said, softening his tone, "I appreciate the concern, but this isn't your fight. Henderson has a problem with me specifically, and I need to address it directly." "What if he brings friends?" Jake asked. "Then I'll adapt to the situation." Sarah studied his face with the kind of attention she usually reserved for her paintings. "You're not scared at all, are you?" "No," Marcus admitted. "I'm not. That's what worries me most." After his friends left, Marcus spent the remaining hour before the confrontation in careful preparation. He couldn't carry actual weapons to a high school meeting, but his body was a weapon system trained by the best military instructors in human space. More importantly, his mind was trained to assess tactical situations and respond with appropriate force. The parking lot was nearly empty when Marcus arrived at 8 o'clock. Security lighting created pools of visibility surrounded by deep shadows, providing multiple concealment options for anyone who wanted to avoid witnesses. Henderson had chosen the location well for intimidation purposes, but poorly for actual tactical advantage. Marcus positioned himself in the center of the lot, maintaining clear sight lines in all directions while staying under the brightest available light. If this was going to happen, he wanted it visible to any security cameras that might be recording. Henderson arrived 10 minutes later with 5 friends exactly as Marcus had expected. They approached in a loose formation designed to look casual while providing tactical encirclement. Marcus noted their positions, movement patterns, and probable combat capabilities with professional interest. "Glad you decided to show up, hero," Henderson called out as they closed the distance. "Wasn't sure if you were actually tough or just good at talking." "Let's find out," Marcus replied calmly. Henderson's friends spread out in a wider circle, cutting off obvious escape routes while maintaining plausible deniability about their intentions. It was a reasonably sophisticated intimidation tactic for teenagers, though laughably primitive compared to actual military operations. "Here's how this works," Henderson continued, stopping about 10 feet away. "You're going to apologize for embarrassing me in front of the whole school. You're going to admit that you're just another nobody who got lucky once, and then you're going to stay out of my way for the rest of the year." "No," Marcus said simply. "No?" Henderson laughed, but the sound was forced. "Look around, genius. There's 6 of us and 1 of you. This isn't a movie where the underdog wins through determination and clever dialogue." Marcus took a careful step forward, his movement precise and controlled. "You're right. This isn't a movie." Something in his tone made Henderson's friends shift nervously. Marcus had unconsciously adopted the voice he'd used when addressing enemy combatants during parley negotiations. Calm, absolutely confident, and carrying the weight of someone who had killed before and would do so again if necessary. "In movies," Marcus continued, taking another step, "the hero tries to talk his way out of violence. He shows mercy to enemies who don't deserve it. He follows rules that put him at a disadvantage." Henderson was backing up now, his alpha male posturing cracking under the weight of Marcus's predatory advance. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the difference between entertainment and reality," Marcus said. "In reality, when someone threatens you, you eliminate the threat quickly and permanently. You don't give speeches. You don't show off. You end the problem before it gets worse." The circle of Henderson's friends was collapsing as they unconsciously moved away from Marcus. Whatever they had expected from this confrontation, it wasn't the clinical assessment of violence being delivered by someone who clearly understood the subject at a professional level. "You're crazy," one of Henderson's friends muttered. Marcus turned his attention to the speaker, a heavy-set boy whose expensive clothes couldn't hide his obvious nervousness. "No, I'm experienced. There's a difference." "Experienced with what?" Henderson demanded, trying to reassert control over the situation. Marcus smiled, and the expression was colder than any threat. "Problem solving." The parking lot fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic and the mechanical hum of security lighting. Henderson's tactical position had completely collapsed as his friends gradually moved further away from the confrontation. What had been intended as a 6-against-1 beatdown had become a very public demonstration of exactly why Marcus Chen was not someone to be intimidated. "Last chance, Henderson," Marcus said quietly. "Walk away now, and we never have this conversation again. Try to follow through on your threat, and you'll learn exactly what 3 years of advanced problem-solving experience looks like." Henderson looked around desperately for support from his friends, but found only nervous teenagers who clearly wanted to be somewhere else. His carefully constructed image as the school's dominant force was crumbling in real time, and everyone present could see it happening. "This isn't over," Henderson said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes," Marcus replied with finality. "It is." Henderson and his friends left the parking lot with as much dignity as they could salvage, which wasn't much. Marcus remained in position until their cars disappeared, then walked calmly back toward the school building where he had parked his borrowed motorcycle. As he reached his bike, Marcus noticed movement in the shadows near the building. A figure emerged from the darkness, and he tensed before recognizing Jessica Park's efficient silhouette. "Interesting performance," she said, approaching with her hands visible and non-threatening. "Very theatrical." "You were watching," Marcus observed. "I was gathering intelligence. Same as you, I suspect." Jessica stopped a few feet away, studying him with professional curiosity. "That wasn't a typical teenage confrontation. Henderson isn't a typical teenager. Neither are you." Jessica paused, choosing her words carefully. "I've been doing some research on unusual transfer students whose transcripts show academic excellence but unusual gaps in their educational history, students whose emergency contacts list military addresses, students whose records are flagged with unusual security classifications." Marcus went very still. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Jessica's voice carried the confidence of someone who had done her homework thoroughly. "Your academic records show completion of advanced mathematics, physics, and chemistry courses that aren't available through any accredited homeschool program. Your psychological evaluation includes notations about reintegration challenges and civilian adjustment protocols. Your legal guardianship was transferred through military family services." The accuracy of her information was both impressive and alarming. Marcus had assumed his cover story was sufficient for civilian scrutiny, but Jessica Park was clearly not a typical civilian. "Who are you?" he asked. "Someone who understands that not all high school students are actually high school students," Jessica replied. "My father works for the State Department. My mother is a military intelligence analyst. I've grown up around people whose job descriptions don't match their actual responsibilities." Marcus absorbed this information while reassessing his entire approach to the school. If Jessica could access his classified information, then his cover was blown regardless of how well he played the role of a normal teenager. "What do you want?" he asked. "The same thing you want," Jessica said. "To complete my education without unnecessary complications. The difference is that I understand how to work within existing systems to achieve my objectives." "And you think I don't?" "I think you're applying military solutions to civilian problems," Jessica said, "which works in the short term, but creates long-term complications. Henderson isn't going to disappear just because you demonstrated superior tactical capabilities. He's going to escalate using the resources available to him: political influence, social pressure, administrative manipulation." Marcus considered this analysis while starting his motorcycle. The engine's quiet electric hum was a compromise between his preference for mechanical reliability and the need to avoid drawing attention in a residential neighborhood. "What would you recommend?" he asked. "Integration rather than domination," Jessica said. "Make yourself valuable to the existing power structure instead of threatening it. Use your unique capabilities to solve problems for people who matter. Build alliances based on mutual benefit rather than mutual fear." "That sounds like collaboration with a corrupt system." "It sounds like practical politics," Jessica corrected. "The system isn't going to change because one transfer student demonstrates that he's more dangerous than the local bullies. But it might be influenced by someone who understands both how to work within the rules and how to break them when necessary." Marcus put on his helmet, considering Jessica's proposal. The military approach to hostile environments was often exactly what she described: establish useful relationships, demonstrate value, build networks of influence. The difference was that military operations had clear objectives and defined success criteria. "What's the mission parameter?" he asked. "What counts as success in your version of integration?" "Graduating without creating an incident that attracts unwanted attention to either of our backgrounds," Jessica said. "Completing our education while maintaining the cover stories that allow us to function in civilian society." "Us?" Jessica smiled, and for the first time, the expression seemed completely genuine. "Did you think you were the only one with a complicated history?" "My transcripts are just as fictional as yours, Marcus. The difference is that I've been practicing this role longer." As Marcus drove home through the quiet suburban streets, he reflected on the unexpected complexity of his reintegration mission. He had planned for academic challenges, social awkwardness, and the general difficulty of pretending to be a normal teenager. He had not planned for other students with equally complex backgrounds, or for the discovery that high school politics might be more sophisticated than he'd assumed. His apartment was a studio unit in a complex designed for young professionals and college students. The rental had been arranged through Military Family Services as part of his transition to civilian life, complete with a cover story about being an emancipated minor whose parents died in an industrial accident. The space was furnished with efficient minimalism that reminded him more of military quarters than a typical teenager's room. Everything had a purpose and a specific place, creating an environment where he could maintain the discipline and organization that kept him functional. Marcus sat at his desk and opened his laptop, intending to complete homework assignments. Instead, he found himself researching Jessica Park's background through the same military intelligence databases he'd used to investigate Henderson. The results were both fascinating and disturbing. Jessica's academic records showed the same pattern of advanced coursework and unusual gaps that characterized his own transcript. Her family's State Department connections were legitimate but classified above his access level. Most interesting was a psychological evaluation that used language identical to his own, references to civilian integration and operational security considerations. The implication was unavoidable. Jessica Park was another military brat with a classified background, possibly including actual operational experience. Jefferson High School was apparently home to at least 2 students whose educational transcripts were carefully constructed fiction. Marcus closed the laptop and prepared for bed, running through the events of his first day with military precision. He had identified potential allies, neutralized an immediate threat, and discovered that his mission parameters were more complex than originally briefed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as his confrontation with Henderson created ripple effects throughout the school's social ecosystem. As he settled into sleep, Marcus found himself wondering how many other students at Jefferson High were hiding backgrounds that didn't match their apparent ages and innocent cover stories. The thought was both comforting and disturbing. Comforting because it meant he wasn't alone in his deception. Disturbing because it suggested that his normal high school was anything but normal. His dreams that night were filled with the familiar chaos of battle, but the enemies wore Letterman jackets instead of alien armor, and the battlefield was a cafeteria instead of a crystalline cave system. Even in sleep, his mind was trying to process the strange hybrid reality where teenage social dynamics merged with the tactical thinking that had kept him alive during 3 years of interstellar warfare. Marcus woke to his phone buzzing with multiple notifications. Text messages from Sarah asking if he was okay, emails from teachers about tomorrow's assignments, and a single message from an unknown number that made him instantly alert. Impressive performance last night. We should talk. A friend. The message could have been from Jessica, but something about the phrasing suggested otherwise. Someone else had been watching his confrontation with Henderson, someone with enough information to contact him privately and enough confidence to identify themselves only as a friend. Marcus stared at the message while his coffee brewed, running through possibilities. Jefferson High School was revealing itself to be far more complex than a typical suburban educational institution. Students with classified backgrounds, sophisticated social hierarchies with real political connections, and now mysterious observers who monitored parking lot confrontations. He had survived alien warfare by adapting quickly to changing tactical situations and unexpected intelligence. High school was apparently going to require the same skill set, just applied to an entirely different kind of battlefield. The question was whether his 3 years of military experience had actually prepared him for teenage warfare, or whether he was about to discover that some enemies were more dangerous than the Zephyrian Empire. Either way, Marcus was committed to the mission. He would complete his education, maintain his cover, and figure out what came next in his complicated transition from child soldier to civilian. If that meant navigating high school politics with the same intensity he'd once applied to space combat, then at least he'd never be bored. The notification sound of another message interrupted his thoughts. This one was from Jessica. Coffee before school? We have things to discuss. Marcus typed back a quick confirmation, then finished his morning routine with military efficiency. Today was going to bring new challenges and revelations, but he was as ready as he could be. After all, he had faced worse odds with less information and fewer allies. Though he was beginning to suspect that Jefferson High School might actually be more dangerous than the battlefields he'd left behind. The coffee shop 3 blocks from Jefferson High existed in that strange, liminal space of early morning, populated by shift workers ending their nights and students beginning their days. Marcus arrived first, choosing a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances and exits. Old habits died hard, especially when those habits had kept him alive through situations where a moment's inattention meant death. Jessica arrived exactly on time, carrying herself with the kind of punctuality that suggested military background or diplomatic training. She ordered black coffee and a plain bagel, the kind of efficient breakfast choice that prioritized function over pleasure. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "I thought we should clarify a few things before the school day begins." "Such as?" Jessica pulled out her phone and showed him a photograph taken from the school's security footage. It clearly showed Marcus in the parking lot confrontation, but the image quality was too poor to capture audio or detailed facial expressions. Such as the fact that last night's performance is now part of the official record, she said. Henderson's father has already called the principal's office to demand an investigation into threats made against his son. Marcus studied the image with professional interest. Interesting that they have footage, but apparently didn't intervene during the actual incident. Security at Jefferson High isn't about student safety, Jessica said. It's about liability management and evidence collection. They're more interested in having documentation of problems than preventing them. And you know this how? Jessica's smile was sharp and knowing. Because my mother helped design the security protocols when she was consulting for the district about potential threat assessment in educational environments, which is bureaucratic language for what do we do if enemy agents try to infiltrate through the school system. Marcus set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. Enemy agents. The Zephyrian War created a lot of paranoia about sleeper cells and deep-cover operatives, Jessica continued matter-of-factly. Military families relocating to civilian communities, veterans with psychological damage and unregistered combat modifications, children who had been exposed to alien technology or enemy interrogation techniques. You seem remarkably well informed about classified military concerns. I should be. I helped test some of the screening protocols. Jessica's expression became more serious. My official age is 17. My actual chronological age is 22. I spent 4 years as a deep-cover operative in Zephyrian-occupied territories, gathering intelligence on their civilian administration systems. Marcus absorbed this information while reassessing everything he thought he knew about Jefferson High School. If Jessica was telling the truth, then they weren't just two military veterans pretending to be teenagers. They were two combat operatives whose real ages and backgrounds were substantially different from their cover identities. How many others? He asked. Here? At least 6 students whose records show the same pattern of advanced education and timeline inconsistencies, possibly more if they're using better cover stories than we are. A whole school full of military veterans pretending to be teenagers? Not the whole school, Jessica corrected. Maybe 10%. The rest are actual civilians, which creates an interesting dynamic. We have to be careful not to reveal ourselves to the real teenagers while coordinating with other operatives who are maintaining similar covers. Marcus considered the implications. Henderson and his friends, are they actual civilians or operatives with different mission parameters? Henderson is legitimate civilian aristocracy. His responses to stress and confrontation are consistent with someone who has never faced actual violence. But some of his friends... Jessica paused. Let's just say that not everyone on his side is as helpless as they appear. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. Coffee shop meeting confirmed. Package delivery at 800 hours. Check locker 247. Jessica noticed his expression change. Problem? Someone's been monitoring our movements and knows how to reach me. Marcus showed her the message. Any idea who might be running surveillance? Could be school administration, concerned parents, actual intelligence services, or other operatives trying to make contact. Jessica studied the message with professional attention. The military time notation suggests someone with service background, but the package delivery methodology is more consistent with intelligence protocols. Should we check the locker? We should assume it's either a test, a trap, or actual intelligence that someone wants us to have, Jessica said, which means we need to be prepared for all 3 possibilities. They finished their coffee quickly and walked to school together, maintaining casual conversation that wouldn't attract attention, while both constantly scanning for potential surveillance or threats. The morning crowd provided good cover for counter-surveillance activities, but also created multiple opportunities for hostile contact. Jefferson High buzzed with the kind of energy that followed any significant social disruption. Students clustered in small groups, exchanging theories and rumors about the parking lot confrontation. Marcus noted that the versions of events had already mutated beyond recognition, with some accounts having him single-handedly defeat 6 attackers, while others suggested the entire incident was staged for social media attention. "Fame is problematic for operational security," Jessica murmured as they approached the main building. "So is hiding," Marcus replied. "Sometimes the best cover is being exactly what you appear to be, just more competent than expected." Locker 247 was located in the freshman hallway, an area where upperclassmen rarely went and where surveillance was lighter due to administrative assumptions about younger students being less likely to cause serious problems. The location choice showed sophisticated understanding of the school's security blind spots. Marcus approached the locker carefully, noting that the combination lock had been replaced with a standard key lock. A small envelope was taped to the inside door, along with a key that fit the new lock mechanism. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper with a brief message. "Status report required. Student Integration Protocol 7. Conference Room B, 3:45 p.m. today. Come alone. Bring current operational assessment. Colonel Morrison." Marcus felt his blood pressure spike involuntarily. Colonel Morrison had been his commanding officer during the final year of the Zephyrian War, the woman who had recommended him for the civilian reintegration program. If she was here, it meant his cover assignment was either being modified or terminated. "Military contact?" Jessica asked quietly. "My former commanding officer wants a meeting this afternoon." Jessica's expression became carefully neutral. "That's either very good news or very bad news. Usually both." The morning classes passed in a blur of routine academic work that felt surreal after the revelation that his civilian cover might be compromised. Marcus found himself analyzing every interaction for hidden meaning, wondering which students were actual teenagers and which were operatives maintaining their own carefully constructed identities. During lunch, Sarah and the art department refugees had clearly been discussing his situation extensively. They approached with the kind of coordinated concern that suggested detailed planning. "Okay, mysterious warrior poet," Sarah said, settling down across from him with determination. "We've had a group consultation and we've decided that you need proper friend intervention." "Intervention for what?" "For being too competent at everything and not asking for help with anything," Emma said. "Normal people struggle with things occasionally. They ask questions, they make mistakes, they act like they don't know everything about physics and chemistry and tactical confrontation management." "Tactical confrontation management?" Marcus repeated. "That's what Jake calls what you did to Henderson," Maria explained. "Because ass-kicking seemed too crude for such an artistic performance." David leaned forward conspiratorially. "We've also decided that if you're going to be our group's mysterious badass, you need to let us help with something occasionally. Otherwise, the friendship feels unbalanced." Marcus found himself genuinely touched by their concern, even as he recognized how impossible it would be to explain his actual situation. These were real teenagers dealing with real teenage problems, offering authentic friendship to someone whose entire identity was a carefully constructed lie. "What kind of help?" he asked. "Well," Sarah said, pulling out her sketchbook, "we're working on this installation piece for the senior art show. It's supposed to represent the disconnect between digital communication and human connection. We've got the visual components figured out, but the technical aspects are kicking our asses." She showed him detailed drawings of an interactive sculpture that would respond to audience members' movements and voices, creating unique audio-visual patterns based on human input. The concept was sophisticated, but the engineering requirements were complex enough to challenge college-level students. "We need help with programming, electronics, and acoustic engineering," Jake said. "Basically everything that requires actual technical knowledge instead of artistic vision." Marcus studied the plans with growing interest. The project was ambitious enough to be genuinely challenging, while providing a legitimate reason for him to demonstrate advanced technical skills without raising suspicions about his background. "This is impressive work," he said honestly. "The concept integration between visual, auditory, and interactive elements shows real sophistication." "So you'll help?" Emma asked hopefully. "Yes," Marcus said, making the decision quickly. "But we'll need access to better equipment than what's available in the school art department." "How much better?" Sarah asked. Marcus was already mentally cataloging the resources they would need. Advanced microprocessors, professional-grade sensors, acoustical analysis software, and fabrication equipment that definitely wasn't part of Jefferson High's budget. "Better enough that we'll need to work on this outside of school," he said. "I know a place where we can access professional-level equipment." The place was actually a military technology lab that had been converted to civilian use as part of veteran reintegration services. Marcus had clearance to use the facility for educational purposes, though he had never expected to need it for a high school art project. "That's amazing," Maria said. "Where?" "A community makerspace downtown," Marcus said, improvising a cover story. "My grandfather had connections there before he died." The lie came easily, built on fragments of truth and designed to deflect further questions. His fictional grandfather's military service provided cover for a wide range of knowledge and resources that might otherwise be difficult to explain. The bell rang, ending lunch period and forcing them to scatter to their respective classes. Marcus found himself looking forward to working on the art project, both because it would give him a legitimate reason to spend time with his new friends, and because it would provide cover for maintaining his technical skills. The afternoon crawled by with unusual slowness, as Marcus anticipated his meeting with Colonel Morrison. His last conversation with his former commanding officer had been 6 months ago, during his final psychological evaluation before civilian placement. She had been optimistic about his adjustment prospects, though concerned about his tendency to approach civilian problems with military solutions. At 3:45 p.m., Marcus made his way to Conference Room B, a space typically used for parent-teacher meetings and administrative discussions. The room was empty, except for a woman in civilian clothes who looked exactly like Colonel Morrison, despite being supposedly thousands of miles away from any military installation. "Sergeant Chen," she said, standing as he entered, "please sit down." Marcus remained at attention out of habit. "Colonel Morrison, I wasn't aware you were in the area." "I'm not, officially." Morrison gestured for him to sit, then took the chair across from him. "This meeting doesn't exist in any official capacity. I'm here as a concerned mentor, checking on a former subordinate's civilian adjustment." "My adjustment is proceeding normally," Marcus reported automatically. "Is it?" Morrison opened a tablet and displayed what appeared to be comprehensive surveillance footage of his confrontation with Henderson. "Because from my perspective, it looks like you're applying counterterrorism tactics to high school social dynamics." Marcus watched himself on the recording, noting details he had missed during the actual confrontation. The footage was much higher quality than the school security cameras could produce, suggesting military-grade surveillance equipment had been monitoring the situation. "Henderson was using intimidation tactics consistent with enemy psychological operations," Marcus said. "I responded with appropriate de-escalation measures." "You terrorized a 17-year-old boy and his friends into submission using techniques designed for enemy combatants." "I prevented violence while establishing clear boundaries for future interactions." Morrison smiled, though the expression contained more concern than approval. "Marcus, you're not wrong about your tactical assessment. Henderson was attempting to establish dominance through implied threat of violence. Your response was both effective and proportional, but it was also completely inappropriate for a civilian educational environment." Marcus frowned. "The alternative was to submit to bullying and encourage escalation." The alternative was to use civilian conflict resolution systems, report the threats to administration, involve parents and teachers, document harassment, and build a case for official intervention. Those systems don't work when the aggressor has political protection. Sometimes they don't, Morrison agreed. But part of civilian reintegration is learning to work within civilian systems, even when those systems are imperfect or corrupt. You can't solve every problem with superior tactical capabilities. Marcus absorbed the criticism while reviewing his decision-making process. From a military perspective, his actions had been completely appropriate. From a civilian perspective, they demonstrated dangerous inability to integrate with normal social systems. "Is my cover compromised?" he asked. "Not yet, but it's fragile. Your academic performance is attracting attention from teachers who recognize advanced knowledge that shouldn't exist in your official educational history. Your social interactions suggest someone with extensive leadership experience and tactical training. And your response to conflict demonstrates comfort with violence that's inconsistent with civilian adolescence." Morrison showed him additional footage, this time from inside the school building. Marcus watched himself moving through hallways, unconsciously maintaining tactical awareness and positioning that marked him as someone with professional military experience. "We've identified at least 12 specific behaviors that could compromise your cover if analyzed by trained intelligence personnel," Morrison continued. "The good news is that most civilian observers lack the training to recognize these patterns. The bad news is that you're not the only person at Jefferson High with intelligence training. Jessica Park. Among others, Jefferson High was chosen for your placement partly because it already had several other operatives completing civilian reintegration. The idea was that you'd be less likely to stand out in an environment where unusual competence was more common." Marcus considered this information. "How many operatives?" 8 current students with military backgrounds ranging from standard service to special operations. 3 teachers who are maintaining covers while transitioning to civilian careers. 1 administrator who provides oversight and support for the entire program. It's a military facility disguised as a civilian school? It's a civilian school that serves as a transitional environment for military personnel who need time to develop civilian social skills before full integration, Morrison corrected. "Most of the students and staff are genuine civilians, but there's enough military presence to provide support and cover for people like you." The revelation recontextualized everything Marcus had experienced since arriving at Jefferson High. Jessica's sophisticated intelligence gathering, the school's unusually advanced security systems, the complex social hierarchies that operated more like military command structures than teenage popularity contests. "What are my new mission parameters?" Marcus asked. "Continue your education while developing genuine civilian social relationships," Morrison said. "Learn to solve problems through civilian methods rather than military tactics. Build connections with actual teenagers who can teach you how normal people your apparent age actually behave." "And the other operatives?" "Coordinate when necessary, but don't rely on them for social integration. Your primary objective is learning to function as a civilian, not maintaining military relationships with fellow veterans." Morrison stood up, indicating that the briefing was concluding. "Marcus, you've been an exceptional soldier. Now you need to become an exceptional civilian. That requires different skills and different approaches to problem solving." "Understood," Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure he did understand. "One more thing," Morrison added as she prepared to leave. "The art project your friends are working on, that's exactly the kind of civilian relationship you should be cultivating. Help them because you care about their success, not because it provides operational cover." After Morrison left, Marcus remained in the conference room for several minutes, processing the implications of everything he had learned. His civilian reintegration was both more supported and more monitored than he had realized. Jefferson High was simultaneously a normal school and a carefully designed transition facility for military veterans. The complexity was both reassuring and overwhelming. He had allies and resources he hadn't known about, but also responsibilities and expectations that went beyond simple academic completion. He was expected to become genuinely civilian, not just to perform civilian behavior convincingly. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Emergency art crisis. Meet us at the studio after school. We need your technical expertise to prevent total creative disaster." Marcus smiled, recognizing the genuine urgency beneath Sarah's dramatic phrasing. This was exactly the kind of civilian relationship Morrison had recommended. Friends who valued his skills while teaching him how normal people handled problems and emotions. He texted back confirmation and left the conference room, heading toward what he hoped would be a refreshingly normal afternoon of helping teenagers solve engineering problems that had nothing to do with warfare, intelligence operations, or life-or-death tactical decisions. The art studio was chaos in the best possible way. Sarah, Jake, Emma, David, and Maria had spread their installation components across every available surface, creating a landscape of half-assembled electronics, artistic materials, and engineering diagrams that looked like the aftermath of a particularly creative explosion. "Marcus!" Sarah called out when he arrived. "Thank God you're here. We've discovered that our artistic vision exceeds our technical capabilities by a factor of approximately infinity." Marcus surveyed the workspace with professional assessment skills, noting both the ambitious scope of their project and the genuine effort they had put into attempting solutions beyond their current knowledge base. "Show me what you've got so far," he said, setting down his backpack and rolling up his sleeves. For the next 3 hours, Marcus lost himself in the pure pleasure of technical problem-solving applied to creative rather than destructive purposes. He helped Jake program the microprocessors that would control the interactive responses, worked with Emma to design acoustic algorithms that would translate human voices into visual patterns, and assisted David in fabricating the mechanical components that would allow the sculpture to physically respond to audience presence. The work was complex enough to be genuinely challenging, but the stakes were entirely different from any technical project he had worked on before. Nobody's life depended on the success of this installation. There were no enemy forces trying to interfere with their progress. The only consequences of failure would be disappointment and the need to try different approaches. "You know," Sarah said during a brief break while Marcus recalibrated sensor arrays, "watching you work is like watching someone speak a foreign language fluently. You understand all these technical concepts that the rest of us are just learning." "Practice," Marcus said, which was true even if the context of that practice wasn't what she imagined. "Where did you get so much practice?" Emma asked. "I mean, this stuff is college-level engineering." Marcus found himself in familiar territory, needing to provide explanation that was truthful but incomplete. "My grandfather was an engineer. He taught me a lot before he died." "He must have been an amazing teacher," Maria said. "And you must have been an amazing student." "We worked well together," Marcus said, which was true of his relationship with his various military instructors, even if the familial connection was fictional. As evening approached, the installation began to take recognizable shape. The sculpture responded to movement with flowing patterns of light and sound, creating unique compositions based on each person's presence and behavior. It was genuinely beautiful, a technological achievement that served purely artistic purposes. "This is incredible," Jake said, watching the sculpture respond to his movements with shifting patterns of color and melody. "It actually works the way we imagined it would." "Better than we imagined," David added. "The interaction between the visual and audio components is creating effects we didn't plan for." Marcus stepped back to observe the group's excitement, noting how different their enthusiasm was from the satisfaction of successful military operations. These were people celebrating the creation of something beautiful rather than the destruction of something dangerous. Their joy came from adding value to the world rather than eliminating threats. "Thank you," Sarah said, approaching him as the others continued experimenting with the sculpture's responses. "I know we asked for technical help, but you've done way more than we expected. This project is going to be amazing because of what you contributed." "You had the vision," Marcus said. "I just helped with implementation." "Implementation is important too," Sarah replied. "But more than that, you cared about making our idea work. That's what made the difference." As they cleaned up the studio and prepared to leave, Marcus reflected on Colonel Morrison's advice about developing genuine civilian relationships. Working on the art installation had been exactly that kind of experience, using his skills to help friends achieve their goals, learning about their perspectives and approaches to problem-solving, contributing to something that mattered to them. The walk home took him through the suburban neighborhood surrounding Jefferson High, past houses where normal families lived normal lives without the complications of military service, classified backgrounds, or cover identities. Marcus found himself wondering what it would be like to truly belong in this environment, to have his greatest concerns revolve around academic performance and social relationships rather than operational security and mission parameters. His apartment felt different when he returned, less like a temporary assignment and more like an actual home. The space was still organized with military efficiency, but the addition of art supplies and technical equipment for the installation project made it feel more personal, more connected to his civilian life rather than just his cover identity. Marcus sat at his desk and opened his laptop, intending to complete homework assignments, but instead finding himself writing a mission report for his own files. The day had brought significant intelligence about Jefferson High's true nature, clarification of his operational objectives, and progress in developing authentic civilian relationships. More importantly, he had spent 3 hours working on a project that had no military applications whatsoever, collaborating with people who valued creativity and beauty over tactical efficiency and operational security. It was the closest he had come to understanding what civilian life might actually feel like, rather than just observing it from the outside. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Impressive integration progress. Continue current approach. Support available if needed." Marcus smiled, recognizing the efficiency of military communication even in civilian context. Someone was monitoring his progress and approving of his approach to the art project and friendship development. The oversight was reassuring rather than intrusive, suggesting that his handlers understood the complexity of genuine civilian integration. Another message arrived, this one from Sarah. "Today was awesome. Same time tomorrow to finish programming the interaction sequences?" Marcus typed back confirmation, then set his phone aside and prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as he continued learning to balance his military training with civilian social development. But for the first time since leaving the service, he felt like he might actually succeed in becoming something other than a soldier. The art installation project gave him a legitimate reason to spend time with people who cared about creating rather than destroying, who solved problems through collaboration rather than tactical dominance, who measured success by beauty and meaning rather than efficiency and elimination of threats. As he fell asleep, Marcus dreamed not of battles and alien warfare, but of lights and sounds responding to human presence, of friends working together to build something unprecedented and wonderful. It was the first time in years that his dreams had been about creation rather than destruction, about hope rather than survival. When he woke the next morning, Marcus realized that Colonel Morrison had been right about the importance of genuine civilian relationships. Working with Sarah and her friends hadn't just provided operational cover, it had begun teaching him how to be human in ways that military service never could. The mission was no longer just about completing his education and maintaining his cover identity. The mission was about discovering who Marcus Chen could become when he wasn't a soldier, when his value came from what he could build rather than what he could destroy, when his relationships were based on mutual care rather than mutual dependence for survival. For the first time since the war ended, Marcus looked forward to the future not because it represented completion of duty, but because it represented the beginning of possibilities he hadn't known existed. High school chaos, it turned out, was exactly the right environment for learning how to be chaotically, beautifully, impossibly human.